Welcome to Quantum RX, the podcast that teaches you how to move beyond stuck emotions and trauma for mind, body, and spirit healing. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. Were you ever taught something when you were younger that you now know to be false? Like eggs cause high cholesterol, or all fats are bad, or even some of the things our parents would say, usually to get us to do something that they wanted us to do, right? Like if you don't wear proper clothes in the rain or cold weather, you're going to get sick. You know, all of these little things that we now know to be false, right? At one time, we believed they were true, right? And we lived our lives in accordance to that. And I could go on and on about all of these, but one place this frequently happens is science. So like I can think there are so many things that I learned in school 20 or 25 years ago in, undergrad, and then also when I was getting my doctorate, that I learned a lot of things that are patently false now. And it's important to keep an open mind and to realize that things evolve and change. So one of the big things I remember is I learned a long, long time ago. I can't even remember if this was in undergrad or for surely when I was doing my doctorate, but we were born with the number of fat cells that we're going to have for our entire lives, and that they only would, get bigger and smaller. That number never changed. We know that this is false. And so it's really interesting because so much of the recommendations that people gave back in the day were based on this information. And so another thing that I learned, and it's very pertinent to what I do now, is we have no control over our involuntary nervous system, or that autonomic nervous system that you guys hear me talk about. That's supposed to be involuntary. You have supposedly no control over that. But we know that we have control over that. And one of the easiest examples of that is like breath. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast, different ways we can, use our breath to control that fight or flight response and to get ourselves into a calmer state and to change basically our state of being. So we do have control over that. And another place is our thoughts. And that's where we're going to dive into a little bit more today. I really want to dive into how the brain works, and from this point of view. And I'm going to make it fun and super simple and easy so that it is easily translatable for people to understand. And so when we talk about that, we're going to talk about what is the difference between the conscious and the subconscious mind, a simple explanation on how the subconscious mind works, and how we can influence the subconscious mind to change our health, happiness, and beyond. If you're curious as to if you have any stored emotions and trauma that might be causing your illness, preventing you from achieving your goals, or even just showing up as the best, most authentic version of yourself, I invite you to take my free stored emotions and trauma quiz, and you will find that link in the show notes. So welcome. I am super excited to talk about this today because one of my main intentions for the podcast going into this second season was to simplify so much of the information that's out there. And so, there's a lot on the internet and in the media now about the mind and consciousness and trauma and all of these things, but they're often not well explained. And so those are some of the things that I want to get into during this season of Quantum RX. And so let's start off first with what is the difference between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. So conscious mind seems pretty simple at its core, because that is largely, your frontal lobe, your thoughts, your, what you're doing, like what I'm doing right now. I am talking, I am moving my hands. All of these things are things that are happening because I am consciously doing them. And the way that I like to explain this to people, and it's also another thing that I think is really important, are like those thoughts, those ruminations that we have in our mind all the time. All of those, like for instance, I'll give you a good example of this morning. This morning, I brought my daughter to school, and when I was dropping her off, a lot of times they have parents that are there to help facilitate the process. And I pulled up, and there was somebody that I knew, not a good friend by any stretch of the imagination, just kind of like an acquaintance, but they live in our neighborhood and we're friendly. And he pulled up and he opened up the door for my daughter, and he saw that it was me. So he popped his head in and said hi. And I was wearing my pajamas. I was still wearing my pajamas. And then my first thought was like, oh my gosh, my hair is not done. I'm wearing my pajamas. And then my next thought was like, okay, whatever. It's not a big deal. I know this guy, he sees me in my neighborhood. He sees me when I'm dressed up for work. He also sees me when I'm working out and I'm, sweaty and, just dripping and my hair is a mess and all of those things. And so it was kind of funny because my first thought was like, oh my gosh, he's going to see me. But it was just kind of a funny thing and a good reminder of, all of the things that go on in our minds. And truly, I don't really care. Like it was not that big of a deal, but that first thought was like shock, like, oh my gosh, somebody's going to see me when I'm in my pajamas and my hair's not done and my teeth aren't brushed and all of those things. It was kind of a funny example of exactly how the conscious mind works. And so when we're talking about the conscious mind, that's exactly what it is, especially when I'm explaining this concept to little kids. I talk about it, think about it as characters or emojis. It's like if you were to think about your conscious mind, it's literally the whole gamut of emojis, I should say. Emoji. I love mochi, and we were just talking about that earlier. So that might be why I said emoji. But emojis, right? You've got the smiley face, the cracking up, like laughing face, just a simple smile. You've got sadness. You've got profound, anger, rage, all of those many things, the whole gamut of emojis. When you think about that, like all the little faces or characters it could be, it's almost unlimited when you think about the conscious mind, because that is like how I am talking to you, how I think during the day, how I get my plan for the day, all of those things, those are all conscious. If I decide I'm going to go work out, moving my body and moving my muscles through a certain range of motion, all of that is conscious. It's funny because I really have, like with kids and children, I'm like, if you have access to a phone or a tablet or something like that, it literally is the range of emojis, but also the little, where there's somebody, a running person or a person who's snowboarding or somebody who's skiing or somebody who's swimming, all of those little ones too. I guess technically, I don't know if those are emojis or just like little icons or whatever those guys are. That's all our conscious mind at work. Even the one with the little glasses, the thinking one, all of those are your conscious mind at work. That's all things you technically have control over. And when I tell people about the subconscious mind, I always tell people to think about it, and this is like little kids included, a monk. Like think about your Buddhist monk who's just sitting there. He's, got his eyes shut. He's just cross-legged and just sitting there, and he's just being. That is the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is, it is not judgmental. It is kind of a duality. It's like either it does or it doesn't. It's not something that applies judgment. And that is largely our conscious mind. It is also amenable to suggestion. And that is one of the main things that people they almost give that up, right? They're like, well, I have no control over anything, but you really do. And we are going to dive into that. But I think the important pieces of the puzzle to remember are our subconscious mind. It is amenable to suggestion. We can't sit there and directly tell it what to do like you would in your conscious mind, because that just does not work. But the more we kind of plant the seeds in our conscious mind with our thoughts, we can start to change the wiring of that subconscious mind, right? It's either going to react or not react. It's kind of like a positive or a negative, and it's not going to judge. It's just going to do, just like that monk would do. The monk is just sitting there and it's saying, there is no positive or negative. There just is. It's kind of like Yoda, except for we've seen Yoda get mad. So it's kind of funny. Yoda will get a little worked up, whereas that monk will just sit there and be like, everything just is. There's no good and bad. It's our conscious mind that gives that positive or negative connotation to things. And that is one of the main mechanisms as to how trauma is formed. And if you have an experience and you don't, have a negative reaction to it, it does not become like a seed of trauma. But if you do have a really negative visceral reaction to it, it will become a seed of trauma. So it's a lot of it, working with your subconscious mind is how we work, first in our conscious mind. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit more. And like I said before, I gave you a little bit of a very simple explanation on how the subconscious mind works. It's always there in the background. It's not, like I said before, it's not something that you can sit there and say, hey, subconscious mind, X, Y, and Z, I need you to do this for me. I mean, technically you could try that, but it's probably not going to work well. For the subconscious mind, a lot of it is to understand that, think of it as it's eavesdropping all the time. We're never fully alone. And, you always have that program of the subconscious mind running in the background. And it's always, like I said, always eavesdropping. It does not care if it's positive stuff, if it's negative stuff. It's just always there. It's part of, what's taking in all of those many, many bits of information, right? We've talked about this before. How many, I think off the top of my head, it's like 2.3 million bits of information come into our subconscious mind per second, but our conscious mind can only process like 126, I believe, 126 bits of information per second. So it's like one of those things where your conscious mind is very limited, but your subconscious mind is very vast, and it's always taking in information to help you survive. I mean, at its very most basic core, it is trying to help you survive. And so, as it's eavesdropping and listening to all of, everything that we're doing and thinking and feeling on a daily basis, there's so much more that's going on in the background. And so, how can we use this to our advantage? There are ways we can influence our subconscious mind to change our health and happiness. And one of them that I had mentioned before was breathwork, right? We've talked about that a lot, how simply just exhaling longer than we inhale can shift you more into that parasympathetic nervous system state, right? That calm state, that rest and digest. It's like actually rest, digest, reproduce, all of those things. And so we can shift our mind that way. And there are, obviously, we've talked a lot about many different breathing techniques where you can directly influence that, automatic nervous system, which influences the subconscious mind. And so another thing that we can do is the way we think and what our thoughts are. And so this is not, I want to make a very clear distinction right now. I am not talking about positive affirmations. While I do think that can be helpful, relying on it 100% will not work. I have seen so many people become frustrated and disheartened because you're like, oh, I'm doing all the positive affirmations every day. I'm writing them in my journal. I'm saying them to myself in the mirror. I say them to myself throughout the day, and nothing is changing. The reason that it's not changing is because this is kind of a different conversation, but it's also they're not feeling it. In order for those types of things to take root, you have to feel it. And if you can't feel it, that means you have something to work on, because that is blocking it, right? Whether it's a trauma or a stuck emotion or something. if you cannot feel what it's like to, just give an example. If you want a job promotion and you keep writing down the name of the position that you want and saying, I am, I'm smart enough, I am accomplished, I know, all of the things that you would be telling yourself to manifest this promotion or new job. If you don't feel that, and if you do not embody it and be able to see yourself in the future doing that job and feeling what it's like to be in that position, you will never be able to manifest it. And that's another thing. I just a little caveat. The word manifestation frustrates me. It's like a lot of things that have become buzzwords that are kind of abused now. Like everyone, especially in pop culture, it's like I manifested it. It's like, did you? And like I mean, technically, yes, but it's one of those things where I feel like it's a word that deserves more respect than it gets, and it's it gets thrown around all the time now. So it's kind of funny how that stuff works, but it actually is very powerful. But what you're doing when you're doing that, you're sending out energetic frequencies, right? You are sending out energetic frequencies, and the universe can respond to that. The universe, God, spirit, source, whatever you want to call it, whatever your choice of words is, that will respond to the energetic signature that you're putting out. And that is why manifestation or positive affirmations can work or not work. And that ties in to some extent to what we're going to talk about right now. But it literally, you need to have a positive mindset and attitude. And so that's not to say that you're not going to have negative thoughts and you're not going to have negative feelings. You will, because you're human, and that's totally normal and totally part of the human experience. But the difference is when those things happen, you don't, like I said before, you don't let it get you completely down and, undone, and you don't give it a ton of context. And I know that's hard. That can be a very hard thing to do. But I'm not sure if you remember a couple of episodes ago, I'm not quite sure which one, I was talking about how it was my birthday. And there were a couple of things, like I had mentioned, I had gotten a big tax bill, and my car ended up getting just slightly scratched. We had a little extraordinarily minor fender bender, right? And I said, if that had happened probably 2, 3, 5 years ago, I probably would have lost it in those days. But now I was just like, you know what? It's a thing. It happened. I did not let it get to me. I did not let my subconscious mind go to all of the negative things that could have happened, like, how are you going to pay for it? What are you going to do? What if something bad happens? All of the things that could happen with this, right? And so it was an aha moment for me, because I realized in that moment, I felt like I was getting challenged on that day. And, by God, universe, spirit, source, whatever you want to call it, I felt like I was getting challenged, because it was almost as if I was proving to myself that I had grown and I had changed. And so, like I said, the more you do this work and the more you change the way you perceive things, the better your subconscious mind is going to work, if that makes sense, right? So it's like the input equals, the output. What we're doing is rewiring the mind, because I don't know if you've heard the phrase, the nerves or neurons that fire together, wire together. And so we want to really enhance those neurological pathways that are basically in that positive attitude framework and away from, the negativity. So what I would encourage you to do is, when things are happening to you on a daily basis and you're thinking about them, is to think about them. It's okay to feel things in the moment, right? Say I'm recording the podcast and my dog starts barking. That would normally get my nervous system all keyed up, because I'd be frustrated, right? I'd be frustrated that I might have to re-record something because the dog started barking or something of that nature. But if I can instead say, okay, the dog's barking, it's not a big deal. We can go back and fix that and maintain my largely calm state, my subconscious mind is going to be like, oh, okay, it's no big deal. So I'm going to be rewiring that pathway, or I should say reinforcing that pathway. And it's the same as like if something you want to happen doesn't happen. It's okay to be disappointed in that moment. Like, oh, it didn't happen. I'm kind of bummed. But then just, you can have those feelings, but don't sit there and ruminate in it. You could just, have that feeling, sit with it for a minute and be like, yeah, that's a bummer. But then be like, something else is going to come along that is going to be better for me. There's so many ways we can work with that. And again, your subconscious mind is like, oh, okay, you're not reacting or freaking out. So we're going to keep reinforcing these pathways of calmness, balance, all of these things. Similarly, you can do this with pain and symptoms in your body. A really good example of this is recently I was working out. I was deadlifting in my garage and I did something I will admittedly not smart. So I did not warm up properly. So normally when you're warming up, you start off just right warming up your body, and then you do very lightweight repetitions of the exercises that you're going to do. And I barely even did anything. I can't even say, I can recall that I didn't do very much for that. I kind of just jumped right into my workout. And as I was I think I had to do 6 or 8 sets of 4 deadlifts. And I was somewhere around I think it was on set 4. And I tweaked my low back because I had been gradually adding more and more weight on. And I tweaked my low back pretty darn bad, like really bad. And it was one of those things where I was like, oh, I can't, I could not stand up. Like my muscles started spasming. And in that moment, I was like, I got to do all the things. So I started immediately telling myself, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. This is just a pain signal from my brain and I'm going to be fine. And so I was able to get myself upright again. And so that was good. I got myself in the house and I started doing all of the things that I know that could help, right? So I used my red light. I have a red light and I was using some essential oils and none of that seemed to be working very well. So what I knew I had to do was break that pain signal. So I ended up I took some medication, which I don't do very often. Probably in the last 15 years, I can think on both hands, I can count, the number of times I had taken pain medication, but I knew I had to disrupt that signal. So I disrupted that signal enough. The pain was still there minimally. Like when it first happened, it was probably a 7 or 8 out of 10. When I got to that point, I got it probably to a 3. It was still a little tweaky, but it was very manageable and I could still move. But I started at that time just telling my mind and my body, and I'd say mostly my mind, it's okay. I'm going to be fine. My body is designed to heal. The body knows how to heal. And so I did that for the next day or 2, and gradually the symptoms went away, decreased. And I did nothing else. I did not take any more pain medication. I did not use the red light again. I did not put any essential oils on it. And it was really interesting because it was almost like an experiment for me that I wanted to see if I could do this with my mind. And I was able to do that. And technically, this is the way it is with I shouldn't say all 100%, because obviously we know nothing is absolute, but most injuries are like this. And so musculoskeletal injuries typically heal, if they're not catastrophic or extraordinary, will heal in the ballpark of 12 weeks. And I wanted to see if I could do it faster. And B, I also wanted to, challenge myself. I wanted to see what was going on, and how I could influence my body, because I've had this happen before. This is something that has happened on the same exact side. It was on my left side. And so I wanted to see if I could not have the same kind of course that I'd had in the past, because normally it would take me I'd say 1 week, one full week to kind of get to where it's not like every movement I have, it's nagging me, but it would take, yeah. And then 2 weeks, like usually 2 full weeks to get through it. And then even then it would be like the signal was weakened and I would have to like kind of build back up very slowly. I could tell you that this, it was interesting because it happened before I went to the last conference that I was at. And I was kind of in the back of my mind, I had that thing. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to sit on an airplane and sleep in a hotel bed for 4 nights. And it was interesting because I got it taken care of in days and I had time even before I was traveling. So it was pretty incredible to experience. And then when I got home, I hopped right back into my regular workouts. I will say the first workout was a little bit tender. And so I did some basic work on it. I did a little bit of, I wouldn't even call it rehab. They're exercises that just strengthen those muscles that I tweaked. And I was fine after that. I was actually very shocked because just constantly sending that signal to my mind that I was okay. I was okay and it was going to be okay. It worked really, really well. And I can tell you so many cases where I'm working with people and they might have a physical symptom that they don't like, whether it's like some kind of like a little minor tremor or an eye twitch or other things of that nature, little things that they don't like that they're very self-conscious of. And when we are doing this work, we can get into it and we can change it. We can make those things stop. And part of it, they understand, is sending this correct feedback to the subconscious mind. So that is my main tip for you. It is, having that general positive attitude. And again, I'm going to repeat this because it's super important. That does not mean being Pollyanna and being fake happy all the time. Or when you're feeling miserable, showing up in the world and saying, hey, I'm happy. No, I want you to be honest. Always be honest with how you're feeling. You deserve that. You deserve to be able to have a day where you're like, I'm just not feeling great. I'm a little under the weather. I'm a little sad or I'm angry or whatever. You honor yourself and say how you're feeling. But in general, the more we can have a positive outlook and a positive attitude about things, the more it changes the way our subconscious mind works. And that's really important. If people understood how incredibly powerful their mind is, we would probably be working on that first instead of going after, symptoms or going after diagnoses. We would actually be focusing on that. So I invite you to, if you have, a pain or a symptom or even a thought that keeps on coming up for you that you're ruminating in, to notice it, acknowledge it, and then, just flip that script. If it's something that you're like, oh, I feel like an imposter, I'm not going to be good at this. Just flip that script and be like, I'm not an imposter. I'm a good person. I'm trying my best. I'm taking the right steps to achieve whatever it is I'm trying to achieve. You don't have to lie to yourself. And I would not encourage you to lie to yourself. But what I would encourage you to do is to change your thoughts on something, that this is going to be a bad day. This is going to be a good day. My kids never listen to me. You could think my kids are going to listen to me today, because the more we put out that, different energy, and we also rewire the brain pathways, the more we're going to get responses from our body and our outer world that are going to make us, happy and make our lives a little bit easier.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.